Good morning. I'm Stephen Leake. I am an elder at First Presbyterian Church in Mesquite, and I'm also the teacher of the Discipleship Sunday School class there. Today we're continuing with our study of the book of John, and this is based on the curriculum from the Daily Bible Study Series by William Barclay. And for a biblical text, we use the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, which is the Bible that is in the pews at our church. Last week we finished up with that great verse, John 3:16. And today we continue in chapter 3, and we are going to study John the Baptist again. John the Baptist is going to come into focus again, and his views about who Jesus was and is to us. So our text today is John 3:22 through 30. After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he spent some time there with them and baptized. John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salim, because water was abundant there, and people kept coming and were being baptized. John, of course, had not yet been thrown into prison. Now a discussion about purification arose between John's disciples and a Jew. They came to John and said to him, "Rabbi, the one who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you testified, here he is baptizing, and all are going to him." John answered, "No one can receive anything except what has been given from heaven. You yourselves are my witnesses that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I have been sent ahead of him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. For this reason, my joy has been fulfilled. He must increase, and I must decrease." We've already seen that part of the aim of the writer of the fourth gospel is to ensure that John the Baptist received his proper place as the forerunner of Jesus, but no higher place than that. But there were those who were still ready to call John Master and Lord. The writer of the fourth gospel wishes to show that John had a high place, but that the highest place was reserved for Jesus Christ alone. And he also wishes to show that John himself never had any idea then that Jesus was supreme. To that end, he shows us the ministry of John and the ministry of Jesus overlapping. Now that's different from the synoptic gospels. For example, Mark 1:14 tells us that it was after John was put in prison that Jesus began his ministry. Now we don't need to argue about which account is historically correct, but the likelihood is that the fourth gospel makes the two ministries overlap, so that by contrast, the supremacy of Jesus may be clearly shown. One thing is certain, this passage shows us the humility of John the Baptist. It was clear that people were leaving John for Jesus. John's disciples were worried. They did not like to see their master take second place. They did not like to see him abandoned while the crowds flocked out to hear and see this new teacher. In answer to their complaints, it would have been very easy for John to feel injured, neglected, and justifiably forgotten. Sometimes a friend's sympathy can be the worst possible thing for us. It can make us feel sorry for ourselves and encourage us to think that we have not had a fair deal. But John the Baptist was above all that. He told his disciples three things. First, he told them that he had never expected anything else. He told them that he was merely the herald, the forerunner for the greater one to come. It would ease life a great deal if more people were prepared to play the subordinate role. So many people look for great things to do, but John was not like that. He knew well that God had given him the subordinate task. It would save us a lot of resentment and heartbreak if we realize that there are certain things which are not for us, and if we accepted with all our hearts and with all our might the work that God has given us to do. To do a secondary task for God makes it a great task. As Robert Burns put it, all service ranks the same with God. Any task done for God is necessarily great. Second, he told them that they could not receive more than God gave them. If the new teacher was winning more followers, it was not because he was stealing them from John, but because God was giving them to him. What jealousies, what heartbreak, what resentfulness we all might escape if we would only remember that the success of others is given to them by God. And we must be prepared to accept God's choice. Finally, John used a very vivid picture which every Jew would recognize, for it was a part of the heritage of Jewish thought. He called Jesus the bridegroom and himself the friend of the bridegroom. One of the great pictures of the Old Testament is of Israel as the bride of God and God as the bridegroom of Israel. The union between God and Israel was so close that it could be likened only to a wedding. When Israel went after strange gods, it was as if she were guilty of infidelity to the marriage bond. That from Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Isaiah. And St. Paul used the analogy of the church as the bride of Christ in 2 Corinthians and Ephesians. It was this picture that was in John's mind. Jesus had come from God. He was the Son of God. So Israel was his rightful bride, and he was Israel's bridegroom. But there was one place John did claim for himself, that of the friend of the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, the shashbon, had a unique place at a Jewish wedding. He acted as the liaison between the bride and bridegroom. He arranged the wedding. He sent out the invitations. He presided over the wedding feast. Now, I don't know very many women in the Western world that would let a friend of the groom take care of her wedding. So this was highly unusual thinking to us. He brought the bride and bridegroom together, and he had one special duty. It was his duty to guard the bridal chamber and to let no false lover in. He would only open the door when he heard and recognized the bridegroom's voice. When he heard the bridegroom's voice, he went away rejoicing, for his task was completed and the lovers were together. He was not jealous of the bridegroom. He knew that his only task was to bring the bride and bridegroom together. And when that task was done, he willingly and gladly faded out of the picture. John's task had been to bring Israel and Jesus together, to arrange the marriage between Christ, the bridegroom, and Israel, the bride. That task completed, he was happy to fade into obscurity, for his work was done. It was not with envy that he said Jesus must increase and he must decrease. It was joy. Now, as a teacher, I struggle with this. I must remember that just because I have the podium, I should not try to win disciples for me, just to satisfy my desire for attention and recognition. It's not for me that I should seek the devotion of others. It's for Jesus Christ. That's our lesson for today. Next week we'll continue with chapter 3. Goodbye and God bless.